Welcome back. The United States and Israel have a special bond that is only getting stronger. And it all began on May 14th, 1948, when an American president became the first world leader to recognize the reborn state of Israel. Here's the inside story of how President Harry Truman made history and walked in the footsteps of an ancient biblical Persian king. Take a look.
There was so much pressure on Harry S. Truman with regard to his decision. Would he support the Jews in their quest to have a rebirth of their homeland, or would he go against them? Because all of the State Department and his Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, all said, don't do it. Don't support Israel. We may be facing World War III against the Soviet Union, and we need Arab oil. It would be a mistake to do this. But Harry Truman was greatly concerned over the 6 million Jews who had died in the Holocaust and over the 1.5 million Jews who had survived. He also knew history very, very well, and he knew the Bible. He had read through the Bible 6 different times in his lifetime. His mother called them Lightfoot Baptists because they were Baptists who liked to dance. And so Truman knew his Bible, and he knew the prophetic words concerning Israel being brought back into their homeland. And so he had to take into account what was best for the United States, but he came to the decision that what would be best for the United States is to support the Jews in their quest for a homeland in Israel. Well, the problem was that he didn't tell anyone what his decision was going to be, and the Zionists were somewhat panicking because the vote was approaching in the United Nations, and they didn't know if Truman would vote for them or if he would go against them. And so they sent their top diplomat, a man named Chaim Weizmann, who was kind of like the Benjamin Franklin of the Zionist movement. He was the one who convinced the British to give them the Balfour Declaration after World War I. Now this is after World War II, and they sent him in again to speak to President Truman, but he wouldn't speak to them. So the Zionists are panicking, and then somebody said, hey, I know that President Truman's best friend is a Jew. His name is Eddie Jacobson. So they called him, they woke him up in the middle of the night, and they said, you got to go to the White House and get Truman to meet with Chaim Weizmann. Eddie Jacobson, on his own dime, flew to Washington, D.C., walked into the White House unannounced and said, I'm here to see the president. And the secretary said, that's fine, just don't talk about Zionism or the rebirth of Israel. And Eddie Jacobson said, that's the only reason I'm here. He walked into the Oval Office, sat down with Truman, and they had small talk, and then he started to talk about Zionism and the vote in the United Nations. Harry Truman said, I'm not talking to you about this, Eddie. I told everybody I'm not talking to anyone. Eddie Jacobson is thinking, what am I going to do? And then he had an idea. He saw a statue of Andrew Jackson on Harry Truman's desk. And he said, Harry, all our lives you've told me about your hero, Andrew Jackson. He said, do you know who my hero is? And Truman said, no, who's your hero, Eddie? He said, my hero is Chaim Weizmann. He's an old man. He's come all the way to America to just meet with you, and you won't meet with him because some of our other leaders were rude to you? Harry, that doesn't sound like you. I thought you could take the heat in this office. So Harry turned around, looked out his window for a while, tapped his fingers on his desk, and turned around and said, go ahead and set up the meeting. So they snuck Chaim Weizmann into the White House so that the press wouldn't see. And it was in those meetings that Harry Truman made his decision to support the rebirth of Israel. And that is why, after a year later, the chief rabbi from Israel came and visited Truman in the White House and said, you are a modern-day Cyrus. And so that is why I wrote this story about Harry Truman.
Up next, my final thoughts on what all this history coming to life today in Israel means for you. Stick around.